The grand hallway of Kensington Palace felt colder than usual that morning. Princess Charlotte walked beside her mother, Catherine, her small shoes clicking against the marble floor. But something was wrong. The 9-year-old could feel it, the way her mother's hand trembled slightly in hers. They were heading to a private family meeting. The kind adults whispered about behind closed doors. The kind that made everyone's faces tight and serious. Charlotte had noticed things changing over the past few months. Her grandfather, the king, looked tired at every gathering. Her father spoke in hushed tones on phone calls late at night, and Queen Camilla smiled more than ever. But her eyes stayed cold. 3 days earlier, Charlotte had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. She'd been looking for her brother George in the West Wing when she passed a partially open door. Inside, Queen Camilla sat with 2 men in dark suits. Papers covered the table between them. "The public doesn't need to know everything," Camilla had said, her voice sharp as glass. "Charles trusts me completely. By the time anyone questions it, the changes will already be in place." Charlotte had frozen in the hallway. One of the men replied, "And if Princess Catherine raises concerns?" Camilla's laugh was soft and dangerous. "Catherine has no proof. And without proof, she's just another emotional woman making accusations." Charlotte had run back to her room, heart pounding. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. Something bad was happening. Something that involved her mother. Now, walking down that cold hallway, Charlotte squeezed her mother's hand. Catherine looked down at her daughter, managing a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mummy," Charlotte whispered, "are you scared?" Catherine stopped walking. She knelt down, straightening Charlotte's collar with gentle fingers. "Sometimes grown-ups have to do difficult things, darling. But we do them because they're right." Before you find out what happens next, if you love powerful true stories like this one, hit that subscribe button. These emotional journeys don't come around every day. The meeting room doors opened. Inside, King Charles sat at the head of a long table. Queen Camilla sat to his right, her posture perfect, her expression sympathetic. Too sympathetic. Like she'd already won something. Several advisors lined the walls. And in the corner, barely visible, stood Marcus, the head of the royal guard. His weathered face was unreadable. But his eyes found Charlotte's for just a moment. And in that moment, Charlotte saw something that made her heart skip. He knew something too. "Catherine," the king began, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Thank you for coming. We need to discuss some serious allegations that have been brought to my attention." Camilla leaned forward slightly, hands folded on the table. "Allegations about financial irregularities, about decisions made without proper consultation, about protocols ignored." Catherine stood perfectly still. "I've followed every protocol to the letter, as you well know." "Of course you have, dear," Camilla said smoothly. "But the records tell a different story. And records don't lie." Charlotte watched her mother's jaw tighten. She watched her grandfather look away, uncomfortable. And she watched Camilla's fingers drum once, twice, 3 times on the tabula gesture of barely contained triumph. That's when Charlotte understood. This wasn't a meeting. It was a trap. And her mother had walked right into it. But what Camilla didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Charlotte had already found the real records, hidden in a place no one thought to look, and she'd shown them to someone who could actually do something about it. Marcus. The guard in the corner touched his pocket once. A small gesture. A signal. The game was about to change. And a 9-year-old princess was about to prove that even the smallest voice could shatter the biggest lies. Asterisk. Camilla slid a folder across the table toward King Charles. Her movements were calculated, deliberate. "These are copies of authorization forms, signed by Catherine, approving expenditures that were never discussed with the Household Financial Committee." Catherine's face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. "I never signed those forms." "Your signature is clearly visible," Camilla replied, opening the folder to reveal several documents. Dates stamped and witnessed. Charles rubbed his temples, looking older than his years. "Catherine, this is serious. These authorizations total nearly £200,000. Money that can't be accounted for. So I didn't authorize them. Catherine said firmly. Someone forged my signature. Camilla's expression shifted to something that might have been pity if it weren't so clearly false. I understand you're under tremendous pressure. 3 children, constant public scrutiny. Perhaps you simply forgot. I didn't forget, Catherine interrupted, her voice rising slightly. And I didn't sign anything. This is a setup. The room fell silent. One of the advisors shifted uncomfortably. Another studied his hands. No one wanted to be caught in this crossfire. Charlotte felt her chest tighten. She'd heard her parents talk about gaslighting once, explaining it to George when he'd asked about a documentary, making someone doubt their own memory. Their own reality? That's what Camilla was doing right now. But Charlotte had seen the truth 3 nights ago. She'd been unable to sleep, worried about what she'd overheard. So she'd gone to her mother's private office, thinking she might find anything that could help. The office had been dark, but light spilled from under the door of the adjoining storage room. Charlotte had peered inside to find someone she recognized, Mrs. Whitmore, one of Camilla's personal secretaries. The woman was hunched over a small desk, carefully tracing something with a pen. Pages of Catherine's old correspondence sat beside, her practice materials for copying a signature. Charlotte had watched for nearly a minute before Mrs. Whitmore noticed her. The woman had jumped up, face flushed. Princess Charlotte, you shouldn't be here. What are you doing? Charlotte had asked, even though she already knew. Mrs. Whitmore had scrambled to gather the papers. But Charlotte had been faster. She'd grabbed one of the forged documents and ran straight through the corridors until she found the one person she knew would listen. Marcus had been doing his final rounds near the king's apartments. Charlotte had nearly crashed into him, breathless and clutching the paper. Please, she'd gasped. Please, you have to help my mummy. Marcus had taken the paper carefully. His eyes had scanned it once, then again. Then he'd knelt down to Charlotte's level. Does anyone else know you have this? Charlotte had shaken her head. Good, Marcus had said quietly. Listen to me very carefully, Princess. You did the right thing coming to me. But we need to be smart about this. Can you be brave for a few more days? Charlotte had nodded, even though she was terrified. I'm going to gather evidence, Marcus had continued. Real evidence that can't be denied. But until then, you can't tell anyone what you saw. Not your brothers, not even your father. Can you do that? Will you save my mummy? Charlotte had whispered. Marcus had placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I'm going to try, but I need you to trust me. Now, standing in this cold meeting room, Charlotte understood that those few days were up. Marcus had his evidence. The question was whether it would be enough. Camilla was still talking, her voice smooth as silk. Perhaps Catherine should take some time away. Rest. The press has been brutal lately, and clearly the stress is affecting me because I'm being framed, Catherine said, her voice breaking slightly. Charles, please. You know me? You know I wouldn't do this. The king looked torn, his eyes moving between his wife and his daughter-in-law. I want to believe you, Catherine. But these documents are forgeries, a new voice said from the corner. Everyone turned. Marcus stepped forward, his military bearing evident in every movement. In his hand was a different folder, a thicker one. Camilla's face went rigid for just a fraction of a second. Then the sympathetic mask slipped back into place. Marcus, this is a private family matter. With all due respect, Your Majesty, Marcus said, addressing the king directly. It stopped being private when fraud was committed on royal premises. I have evidence that requires your immediate attention. Charlotte watched her grandfather straighten in his chair, watched Camilla's fingers stop drumming, watched her mother's eyes fill with sudden, desperate hope. What evidence? Charles asked. Marcus opened his folder. Security footage, financial records, and testimony from a witness who saw the forgeries being created. Camilla stood abruptly. This is absurd. Charles, you can't possibly sit down, the king said quietly. But there was steel in his voice now. Camilla sat. Marcus placed the first document on the table. It was a security log showing Mrs. Whitmore entering Catherine's office at unusual hours. Always when Catherine was away. Always late at night. A second document was a bank statement showing payments made to Mrs. Whitmore from an account traced back to Camilla's private holdings. The third was a sworn statement from another guard who had also witnessed suspicious behavior but had been too afraid to report it. And the fourth, Charlotte felt her heart skip, was her own testimony, written in Marcus's careful handwriting from their conversation 3 nights ago. Princess Charlotte witnessed the forgery in progress, Marcus said simply. She brought me the evidence, and I spent the last 72 hours confirming what she saw. Every eye in the room turned to Charlotte. She felt small, terrified. Her mother's career, maybe her whole place in the family, hung on what happened next. But she also felt something else, something stronger than fear. She felt the weight of truth. And truth, her father had once told her, was the most powerful thing in the world. Asterisk, the silence in the room was suffocating. Charlotte could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could feel everyone's eyes on her. Camilla was the first to speak, and her voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something sharp. You're going to believe a child's story over documented evidence? I'm going to believe what can be verified, Charles said slowly. He turned to Charlotte, and his expression softened. Charlotte, sweetheart. Come here, please. Charlotte walked forward on shaking legs. Her mother reached out to touch her shoulder as she passed, a gentle squeeze of support. When Charlotte reached her grandfather's chair, he guided her to stand beside him. Can you tell me what you saw? He asked gently. In your own words? Charlotte took a deep breath. She'd practiced this with Marcus, but now that the moment was here, the words felt stuck in her throat. She glanced at her mother, who gave her the smallest encouraging nod. I couldn't sleep, Charlotte began, her voice small but clear. I was worried because I heard Queen Camilla talking about Mummy, about making people think she did something wrong. Charlotte. Darling, Camilla interjected, her tone dripping with false concern. Children often misunderstand adult conversations. Let her finish, Charles said sharply. Charlotte continued, gaining confidence. So I went to Mummy's office. I thought maybe I could find something to help. And I saw Mrs. Whitmore in the storage room. She had papers with Mummy's signature on them. Old letters. And she was copying the signature onto new papers. Over and over. And what did you do? Charles asked. I took one of the papers and ran. I found Marcus and showed him. Charles looked at the document Marcus had presented. Then he looked at his granddaughter's face, earnest, frightened, but truthful. Why didn't you come to me? Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. Because I heard Queen Camilla say that no one would believe Mummy without proof. And I'm just a kid. I thought no one would believe me either. Catherine made a soft sound, somewhere between a sob and a gasp. William, who had been standing quietly near the door, moved closer to his daughter. Charles's jaw tightened. He turned to Camilla, and for the first time since the meeting began, his expression was cold. Camilla, I need you to explain these payments to Mrs. Whitmore. Private household matters, Camilla said dismissively. Bonuses for good service? £20,000 in bonuses? Marcus interjected. All within the last 3 months? All paid in cash withdrawals? Camilla's composure finally cracked. Her voice rose. I don't appreciate being interrogated in my own home. It's not your home, Charles said quietly. It's the Crown's. The Crown's business is transparency and truth. He stood up, and everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath. I want Mrs. Whitmore brought here immediately. I want a full audit of all financial documents from the past 6 months. And I want an independent handwriting analysis of every signature on these authorization forms. Charles, you're overreacting, Camilla tried, but her voice had lost its power. Am I? Charles turned to face her fully. Because what I'm seeing here is evidence of fraud. Evidence of a scheme to discredit my daughter-in-law. Evidence that my granddaughter had to sneak around in the dark because she knew something was wrong and didn't feel safe coming to me about it. His voice broke slightly on the last words. Charlotte saw pain flash across his face. I trusted you, Charles continued, and now he was speaking only to Camilla. I brought you into this family. I defended you against every criticism. And you used that trust too, he stopped, shaking his head. Why? Why would you do this? For a moment, Camilla said nothing. Then something shifted in her expression. The mask of sympathy and concern fell away completely, revealing something colder underneath. Because she doesn't belong here, Camilla said flatly, gesturing toward Catherine. She's never been truly royal. The public might love her, but she's made you weak, Charles. Made you soft? This family needs strength. Catherine flinched, as if struck. William moved to his wife's side immediately, his face furious. And you thought framing her for financial fraud was the answer? Charles asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I thought removing the distraction would help you focus on what matters, Camilla replied. The crown, tradition, power, but you're too blind to see it. The room erupted. Advisors gasped. Someone swore softly. William started forward, but Catherine held him back. And Charlotte felt something inside her snap. You're wrong, she said, and her voice cut through the chaos. Everyone stopped, turned. This tiny 9-year-old princess, standing beside her grandfather's chair, looking at the queen with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than her years. My mummy makes Papa stronger, not weaker, Charlotte continued. She makes all of us stronger. And being royal isn't about being mean and lying. It's about protecting people, taking care of them. That's what Mummy does. That's what makes her more royal than you'll ever be. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Like a verdict, Camilla stared at Charlotte, and for the first time, she had no response. No clever comeback. No manipulation to deploy. She'd been beaten by a child's simple truth. Charles reached down and took Charlotte's hand. Out of the mouths of babes, he murmured. Then, louder, to the room. This meeting is over. Camilla, we will discuss your role in this family privately. Marcus, please ensure Mrs. Whitmore doesn't leave the palace grounds. Catherine, he turned to his daughter-in-law, and his eyes were wet. I am so sorry. I should have trusted you, without question. I should have protected you better. Catherine shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You didn't know, should have, Charles insisted. Just as I should have listened when a little girl came to her guard in the middle of the night because she was scared and alone and trying to save her mother. He looked down at Charlotte again. You were braver than any of us. You saw something wrong, and you didn't look away, even when it was frightening, even when you were alone. Charlotte felt her father's hands on her shoulders now, pulling her into a hug. Felt her mother's arms wrap around both of them. And finally, the fear and tension that had been coiled inside her for 3 days released in a flood of tears. She'd done it. She'd told the truth, and the truth had been enough. But as her family held her close, Charlotte caught a glimpse of Camilla's face over her father's shoulder. And what she saw there wasn't defeat or shame, it was cold. Calculating anger, the battle might be won. But Charlotte had a sinking feeling that the war was far from over. Asterisk. The next 48 hours moved like a storm through the palace. Mrs. Whitmore was questioned for 6 hours straight. By the end, she'd confessed everything. The forgeries. The payments. The instructions that came directly from Camilla. The handwriting analysis confirmed what Charlotte had witnessed. Every signature on those authorization forms was fake. Carefully practiced copies meant to destroy Catherine's reputation, but while evidence mounted and truth emerged, Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that something else was brewing. Camilla had been quiet since the meeting. Too quiet. She'd retreated to her private apartments and hadn't been seen since. She's planning something, Charlotte told Marcus one evening. She'd found him in the east corridor doing his rounds. Marcus looked down at the princess. In the past few days, he'd developed a deep respect for this child. What makes you think that? Because she looked angry, Charlotte said. Not sorry. Just angry that she got caught. Marcus nodded slowly. You're very perceptive, princess. But your mother is safe now. The truth is out. Is it? Charlotte asked. All of it? Something flickered in Marcus's expression. What do you mean? Charlotte hesitated. She'd been thinking about this constantly. About the conversation she'd overheard. When I heard Queen Camilla talking to those men, she said something about changes being in place. What changes? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he knelt down to Charlotte's level. I've been wondering the same thing. The financial fraud was the distraction, I think. The thing meant to keep everyone busy while something else happened. So what was the real plan? Charlotte whispered. I don't know yet, Marcus admitted, but I'm going to find out. That night, Charlotte couldn't sleep again. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old palace settle around her. At some point she heard voices, hushed and urgent, drifting from somewhere below her window. She slipped out of bed and moved to the window. The palace gardens were dark, but she could make out two figures near the fountain. One was Camilla. The other was a man Charlotte didn't recognize. Their voices were too low to hear clearly, but their body language spoke volumes. Camilla was gesturing sharply, clearly agitated. The man kept shaking his head, looking around nervously. Then Camilla pulled something from her coat. Even in the dim light, Charlotte could see it was a folder, a thick one. She handed it to the man, who hesitated before taking it. Money changed hands. Charlotte saw the flash of bills. Then the man hurried away toward the service entrance. Charlotte's heart raced. She had to tell someone, but who? Her parents were with her grandfather in an emergency meeting with palace lawyers. Marcus would be on duty on the other side of the palace. She made a decision. Grabbing her robe, she slipped out of her room and down the servant stairs. She'd learned these passages over the years of exploring. They were faster than the main corridors and less likely to have guards who would send her back to bed. She reached the ground floor and moved toward the west wing, where Marcus had said he'd be tonight. But as she rounded a corner, she nearly collided with someone. It was one of the advisors from the meeting, Lord Hartley. He looked startled to see her. Princess Charlotte, what are you doing out of bed? I need to find Marcus, Charlotte said. It's important. Hartley's expression changed. Became serious. What's wrong? Charlotte hesitated. She didn't know if she could trust him, but something in his eyes reminded her of her grandfather, weary but kind. I saw Queen Camilla meet someone in the garden. She gave him papers and money. Hartley's face went pale. When? Just now. He went toward the service entrance. Without another word, Hartley grabbed a radio from his belt. Security? This is Hartley. Lock down all exits immediately. No one leaves the grounds without my authorization. Static crackled back. Sir, is there a threat? Potentially, Hartley replied. He looked at Charlotte. Can you show me exactly where they were? Charlotte nodded. Together, they moved toward the garden entrance. As they stepped outside, Charlotte saw Marcus running toward them from the other direction. I heard the lockdown order, Marcus said, slightly out of breath. What's happening? Princess Charlotte witnessed Camilla making a suspicious exchange, Hartley explained. Papers and money to an unknown individual. Yes. Marcus's expression hardened. Where? Charlotte pointed toward the fountain. The three of them approached cautiously. The area was empty now, but something on the ground caught the moonlight. Marcus bent down and picked it up. It was a business card, the kind lawyers use. But the name on it made Marcus swear under his breath. Jeffrey Morrison. He's a tabloid journalist. One of the worst. Hartley closed his eyes briefly. She's taking this to the press, making her own version of events public before the official investigation concludes. With forged evidence, Marcus added grimly. Those papers she gave him, I'd bet anything they're doctored. Emails, maybe. Text messages. Things that paint her as the victim and Catherine as the villain. Charlotte felt sick. But everyone knows the truth now. The truth doesn't matter if the lie gets published first, Hartley said gently. By tomorrow morning, newspapers around the world could be running stories that make your mother look like the guilty party. And even when the real truth comes out later, the damage will be done. Some people will always believe the first story they heard. So what do we do? Charlotte asked, fighting back tears. Marcus looked at Hartley. Some unspoken understanding passed between them. We stop the story before it gets published, Marcus said. How? Charlotte whispered. By getting to Morrison first, Hartley replied. Marcus, you take the service entrance. I'll cover the front gates. We have to intercept him before he leaves the grounds. Marcus nodded and took off running. Hartley pulled his radio again, issuing more orders to the security team. And Charlotte stood in the garden, feeling helpless and small. Then she remembered something. Something Morrison had said when he was talking to Camilla. She'd heard it drift up through her window. "I'll head straight to the office. We can have this online in an hour." Online, not printed. Online meant computers, meant servers, meant the palace internet, Charlotte said suddenly. Hartley turned. What? If he's going to publish it online, he needs internet, right? Can't we just turn it off? Or block the websites? Hartley stared at her for a moment. Then he grabbed his radio. "Get me the IT department, now." While he explained the situation, Charlotte felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find her father standing there, still in the clothes he'd worn to the meeting. He looked exhausted. "Charlotte," William said softly. "What's going on?" Charlotte told him everything. About the meeting in the garden, about Morrison, about the plan to publish lies. William's jaw tightened with each word. When Charlotte finished, he pulled her into a fierce hug. "You keep saving us," he murmured into her hair. "My brave, brilliant girl." "I'm scared, Papa," Charlotte admitted. "I know," William replied. "But you're also right, and that matters more than being scared." Hartley lowered his radio. "It is blocking all external media sites from palace IP addresses. And security has Morrison in custody at the East Gate? He's claiming journalistic privilege, but we have him contained for now." William straightened. "I want to see him. And I want to see those papers, Your Royal Highness," Hartley began. "Now," William said firmly. As they walked toward the security office, Charlotte realized something profound. Her family wasn't just fighting to clear Catherine's name anymore. They were fighting against something bigger. A pattern of manipulation and lies that had probably been going on much longer than anyone realized. And if they didn't stop it completely, Camilla would just try again. Different method. Same goal. The question was, how far was Camilla willing to go? Charlotte was about to find out. Asterisk, the security office was small and harsh under fluorescent lights. Jeffrey Morrison sat in a metal chair, his expensive suit rumpled, sweat beading on his forehead. The folder Camilla had given him lay open on the table. William stood over it, his face growing darker with each page he turned. Charlotte watched from the doorway, her mother beside her now. Catherine had been summoned when word spread about what was happening. "These are completely fabricated," William said, his voice shaking with controlled rage. "Emails I never sent. Text messages from conversations that never happened. Bank statements with my mother's signature forged onto them." "I didn't know they were fake," Morrison protested. "I was given information by a source by the Queen," Marcus interrupted. "We have security footage of the exchange." Morrison went pale. "I want my lawyer." "We'll get your lawyer," William said coldly. "After we understand the full scope of this. These documents, if they'd been published, would have destroyed my mother's reputation. They make her look complicit in the fraud. They suggest she and Camilla worked together, and Catherine discovered it and tried to expose them both." Catherine made a soft sound of shock. "She was going to frame your mother too?" William nodded, jaw tight. "Make it look like a power struggle between the two of them. Position herself as the only trustworthy one. The only one Charles could rely on." Hartley was reading through additional pages. "There's more. Communications supposedly between Catherine and various tabloid journalists. Payments for strategic media placement. It's a complete character assassination designed to look like evidence." "Where did she get the resources to forge all this?" Catherine asked. "Money can buy a lot of expertise," Marcus replied grimly. "With enough payment, you can hire people to create convincing digital forgeries, especially if you have access to real emails and messages to base the fakes on." Charlotte's mind was racing. This was so much bigger than she'd understood. Camilla hadn't just tried to frame her mother once. She'd built an entire backup plan. A nuclear option to destroy multiple people if her first attempt failed. "We need to go to grandfather," Charlotte said quietly. "Right now." Everyone turned to look at her. William nodded. "She's right. This ends tonight. 20 minutes later, the entire family was gathered in Charles's private sitting room. It was nearly midnight. The king sat in his favorite chair, looking older and more tired than Charlotte had ever seen him. Camilla stood by the window, her back straight, her expression unreadable. William spread the forged documents across the coffee table. "This is what your wife gave to a journalist 2 hours ago? With instructions to publish immediately?" Charles picked up the papers with trembling hands. As he read, his face went through a transformation. Shock, disbelief, heartbreak, and finally, cold fury. "You tried to destroy my mother," he said to Camilla, his voice barely above a whisper. "My late mother. The Queen? You forged documents to make it look like she was corrupt." "Charles," Camilla began. "Don't." Charles stood up, the papers clutched in his fist. "Just don't. I gave you everything. My love, my trust, my crown. And you've spent every moment of it scheming and manipulating and destroying." "I was protecting you," Camilla said, but her voice lacked conviction now. "From what?" Charles demanded. "From my family? From people who actually care about me? Or were you just removing anyone who might see through you?" Camilla's mask finally shattered completely. Her face contorted with emotion, anger, frustration, something almost like pain. "You've always been weak, Charles. Your mother knew it. Your father knew it. I've spent years trying to make you stronger, to make this family relevant again, and all you do is cling to these people who make you soft." "These people are my family," Charles said. "I'm your family," Camilla shot back. "I'm your wife, your queen. You're a fraud," Charlotte said clearly. Everyone looked at her. She stood between her parents, small but steady, meeting Camilla's gaze without flinching. "You're not a queen," Charlotte continued. "Queens protect their kingdoms. They sacrifice for their people. They tell the truth, even when it's hard. You just lie and hurt people and pretend it's for something good. But it's not. It's just for you." Camilla stared at the 9-year-old who had unraveled her plans. For a moment, something like respect flickered in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by cold disdain. "You'll regret this," Camilla said to Charles. "All of you. You have no idea what I've sacrificed." "Sacrificed?" Catherine spoke up, her voice sharp. "You tried to destroy my reputation, frame me for crimes I didn't commit. And now we discover you were prepared to do the same to the late Queen. The only thing you've sacrificed is your integrity." "You don't understand the pressure," Camilla insisted, turning back to Charles. "The weight of this institution. The constant judgment." "I did what I had to do. You did what you wanted to do," William interrupted. "There's a difference." Charles moved to his desk and picked up a phone. "Security, please come to my sitting room." "What are you doing?" Camilla asked. And for the first time, Charlotte heard fear in her voice. "What I should have done the moment I learned the truth," Charles replied. "You're leaving the palace tonight. Your access to all royal accounts and systems will be revoked. Your staff will be reassigned. And tomorrow morning, we will be making an announcement about the end of our marriage." "You can't divorce me," Camilla said desperately. "The scandal will be worse if I don't," Charles finished. "The truth will come out, Camilla. All of it. And when it does, I'd rather be the king who chose honesty than the king who protected a criminal." Security officers entered the room. Marcus was with them. Charles gave them quiet instructions. They approached Camilla with professional courtesy, but firm resolve. "Your belongings will be packed and sent to you," Charles said. "You have 1 hour to gather personal items." "Charles, please," Camilla said, and now tears were forming. "Don't do this. We can work through this." "I made mistakes, but you didn't make mistakes," Charles said, his voice breaking. "You made choices, calculated, deliberate choices to hurt people I love, and I can't forgive that. I won't." As security led Camilla from the room, she turned one last time. Her eyes found Charlotte's. And in them, Charlotte saw something that made her blood run cold. Not regret, not shame. A promise. A threat. A silent vow that this wasn't over. Then she was gone, and the room fell into stunned silence. Charles sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his years. Catherine moved to his side, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. William stood nearby, protective and alert. And Charlotte stood in the middle of it all, this little girl who had started an avalanche with one simple act of courage. "Is it really over?" she asked softly. Her grandfather looked at her with eyes full of pain and pride. "The worst of it? Yes. But there will be consequences. For all of us, the press will be brutal. The public will have opinions. Some will support us, some won't. But we're together," Charlotte said, "and we have the truth." Charles smiled, and it was the first real smile Charlotte had seen from him in days. "Yes, we have the truth. Thanks to you, my dear." Marcus approached Charlotte then. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. "You saved your family, Princess. You reminded me why we protect this institution. Not for the power or the titles, but for moments like this, when truth wins." Charlotte felt tears on her cheeks. Ow. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was fading, leaving exhaustion and emotion in its wake. Her mother gathered her clothes and Charlotte buried her face in Catherine's shoulder. "Can we go home now?" she whispered. "Yes, darling," Catherine replied. "We can go home." As the family prepared to leave, Charlotte took one last look around the room. This place where her grandfather sat alone so often. It's a place where decisions that affected millions were made. She thought about Camilla's last look, about the promise of retaliation in those cold eyes. But she also thought about something her father had once told her. Courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing the right thing anyway. She'd been terrified. She still was. But she'd done the right thing. And somehow, that would have to be enough. 3 weeks later, Charlotte sat in the palace garden with her grandmother, not Camilla, but the memory she carried of her great-grandmother. She'd found an old bench, weathered by years, tucked behind the rose bushes. It had a small plaque, "For Elizabeth, who taught us strength." The announcement had been made. The divorce proceedings had begun. And as her grandfather had predicted, the media had erupted. But something unexpected happened. When the palace released the full evidence, the forged documents, the security footage, the testimony from Mrs. Whitmore and others, the public response wasn't scandal. It was support. Support for Catherine. Support for the family. And surprising support for Charles, who had chosen truth over comfort. Charlotte heard footsteps on the gravel path. Her father approached, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. He handed her one and sat beside her on the bench. "How are you holding up?" William asked. Charlotte considered the question carefully. "I'm okay." "Are you?" William smiled. "Your mother asked me the same thing this morning. The truth is, I'm exhausted, relieved, proud, sad, all at once." "Sad for grandfather." "Yes," William admitted. "Whatever Camilla did, he loved her. Losing that love hurts, even when it's necessary." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their chocolate. Then William spoke again. "I need to tell you something. About what happened. About what you did." Charlotte looked up at her father, worried she might be in trouble despite everything. "You saved us," William said simply. "Not just from Camilla. You saved us from becoming the kind of family that ignores truth because it's uncomfortable. You reminded us what we're supposed to stand for." "I was just scared," Charlotte said quietly. "Scared for Mummy, and you acted anyway," William replied. "That's the definition of bravery. But there's something else I want you to understand. You shouldn't have had to do that. You're 9 years old. You should be worried about school and friends and which dress to wear, not about protecting your mother from palace conspiracies." "But someone had to," Charlotte said. "What?" "Yes, but it should have been me. Or your grandfather. Or any of the adults who are supposed to protect you, not the other way around." William's voice was thick with emotion. "I'm sorry you had to grow up so fast these past few weeks." Charlotte leaned against her father's shoulder. "It's okay, Papa. I'm still a kid most of the time." William laughed softly and kissed the top of her head. "Good, because I need you to stay that way for as long as possible." They heard more footsteps, and Catherine appeared with George and Louis. The boys ran ahead, George asking if they could explore the maze while Louis begged to see the fountain. Catherine joined them on the bench, squeezing in beside Charlotte. "Found you," she said warmly. "How's grandfather?" Charlotte asked. "Stronger every day," Catherine replied. "He asked about you, actually. Wanted to know if you'd visit him this afternoon? He has something for you." An hour later, Charlotte stood in her grandfather's study. It was warmer than the last time she'd been here. Charles had opened the windows, letting in spring air and sunlight. He looked different too. Still tired, but somehow lighter. "Charlotte," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Thank you for coming." Charlotte sat, her feet barely touching the floor. "Mummy said you wanted to see me?" Charles reached into his desk and pulled out a small wooden box. He opened it carefully and turned it toward Charlotte. Inside was a medal. Not grand or flashy, but elegant and simple. A silver star on a blue ribbon. "This was your great-grandmother's," Charles said softly. "Queen Elizabeth. She received it for service during the war. For courage under impossible circumstances." Charlotte stared at the medal, afraid to touch it. "She would have loved you," Charles continued. "Would have been so proud of what you did. You have her strength, Charlotte, her sense of duty, her willingness to do what's right even when it costs you something." "I didn't do anything special," Charlotte whispered. "You did something extraordinary," Charles corrected gently. "You saw evil and called it what it was. You gathered evidence. You found allies. And when the moment came, you stood up and told the truth, even though you were terrified." He lifted the medal from its box and held it out to her. "This doesn't officially belong to you. It will stay in the royal collection. But I want you to hold it right now. To remember that you're part of a long line of strong women who protected this family and this nation." Charlotte took the medal with trembling fingers. It was heavier than she expected. The ribbon was faded, the silver slightly tarnished, but it felt important, real, like holding history. "What happens now?" Charlotte asked. "With Queen Camilla?" Charles sighed. "She's moved to a private residence. The divorce will be finalized in a few months. There are legal proceedings about the fraud and forgery. She may face criminal charges. Do you still love her?" The question slipped out before Charlotte could stop it. Charles was quiet for a long moment. "I love who I thought she was, but I'm learning that person never really existed. And yes, that hurts. It will probably hurt for a long time. But it hurts less than living with lies." "I'm sorry I had to tell," Charlotte said, tears forming. "I'm sorry I ruined your marriage." "Oh, sweetheart," Charles said, coming around the desk to kneel before her. "You didn't ruin anything. Camilla's choices ruined it. You just refused to let those choices hurt more people. There's a huge difference." He took the medal gently from her hands and placed it back in its box. Then he pulled a different, smaller box from his pocket. "This one is yours. For real." Charlotte opened it to find a simple silver bracelet with a single charm, small detailed lion. "For the brave heart you showed," Charles said. "For the strength that lives in you. For being exactly who you are, even when it's hard." Charlotte threw her arms around her grandfather's neck, and they held each other while sunlight streamed through the windows in the world. Outside continued its chaos. When Charlotte finally returned to her parents, she wore the bracelet. Catherine noticed immediately and smiled. William pretended not to see her wiping tears. That night, as Charlotte lay in bed, she thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the secrets, the confrontation, the truth. The aftermath. She thought about Camilla's last look and wondered if the woman would ever really be gone from their lives. She thought about her grandfather's sadness and her mother's relief and her father's pride. And she thought about the medal in the royal collection, about her great-grandmother, who had faced her own impossible choices in her own impossible time. Charlotte didn't feel particularly brave. She felt tired and small and still sometimes scared. But her father had said something that stuck with her. Courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing the right thing anyway. She'd done the right thing. She'd protected her family. She'd stood up for truth. And maybe, just maybe, that would ripple out in ways she couldn't yet see. Maybe some other little girl years from now would hear this story and find the courage to speak up about something wrong in her own life. Maybe that's what being royal really meant. not crowns and palaces, but making choices that helped people, that protected people. That said, clearly and firmly, this is wrong. And I won't pretend otherwise. Charlotte touched the lion charm on her bracelet and smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow there would be school and friends and homework and all the normal things that 9-year-olds dealt with. There would probably be whispers and questions from classmates who'd seen the news. There would be adjustments and changes and a new normal to figure out. But tonight, she was just Charlotte, a little girl who loved her family, who'd been brave when she needed to be, who'd learned that truth, no matter how hard, was always worth fighting for, and that was enough. The palace settled into silence around her. Somewhere in the building, her grandfather sat alone with his thoughts. Her mother and father talked quietly in their room. George snored softly down the hall. Louis clutched his stuffed animal and dreamed of dinosaurs. They were safe. They were together. And they were free from the lies that had threatened to tear them apart. Because one little girl had refused to stay silent. Because one little girl had stood up and said, "No, this is wrong." Because one little girl had reminded them all what really mattered. And tomorrow, when Charlotte woke up, she would still be that same girl. Brave not because she wasn't scared, but because she did the right thing anyway. That was the real royal legacy. Not the crowns or titles, but the courage to protect the people you love. And Charlotte wore that legacy better than any crown could ever fit.